Welcome to the Peace Offerings Foundational Series. In this segment and the videos following this segment, I'm going to walk you through the lifestyle and dietary practices that Laura and I practice and teach at the Peace Offering. And the first one we're going to start with is something called circadian biology, circadian rhythm, and you can simplify this even more and just think it's really about following the sun. So what we have learned relatively recently is that light frequencies, and in particular blue light, is a core regulator of the human rhythm. And what we know is that visible light synchronizes the human biological clock in a portion of the hypothalamus called the SEM to the 24-hour solar cycle. And it is the blue color wavelengths that specifically do this. Our eye and our retina, the shape of the eye, the material of the eye, lets blue light in more than any other wavelength and hits the retina and transmits that information directly to the hypothalamus, controlling the rhythm, the sleep-wake cycles, your eating and bowel movement cycles. Every cycle that's happening is essentially controlled by the sun, and in particular, this blue light. Here is a picture of the location, the gland of the hypothalamus, which is sort of the master control center of the body and of the endocrine system specifically. And it is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, this portion of the hypothalamus that's responsible for sensing blue light. Now, one of the ways, and probably one of the most important ways, that the hypothalamus then regulates this rhythm is with the release and production of cortisol and melatonin. Now, the hypothalamus doesn't produce these things. Cortisol is produced in the adrenal glands, and melatonin is produced in the pineal gland, but they take their signaling from the hypothalamus, which takes it from blue light. And it is these two hormones that essentially control our sleep-wake cycle. So how does that work? Well, in the presence of blue light, cortisol gets released. And in the absence of blue light, and it takes about 90 to 120 minutes for this to happen, melatonin gets released. So in a natural rhythm, what would happen is something like 2 hours after the sun sets, in our ancestral background, there wouldn't be any blue light because firelight does not have blue color in it, or very little. That one would get drowsy, and then you would go to sleep. And that drowsiness is the impact of melatonin release. That's what you're feeling. And it starts the whole sleep cascade. The problem that people are experiencing nowadays is that blue light is overloaded in our environment, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Here is another graphic just to illustrate this relationship between cortisol, melatonin, what's happening in the pineal gland, all as it relates to blue light, and some of the things that are regulated by melatonin. Since the early 2000s, we have seen a parabolic increase in LED lights. LEDs are low energy light. So they're very energy efficient, which is why we're using them. And it's not only in your light fixtures that LEDs are used, it's in the devices. And it is because you can get a lot of light power with very little energy. Now, the thing is that LEDs have a peak of emission at about that blue light frequency, so right around 400 nanometers. And if you look at this spectral analysis of the different kinds of light, sunlight, LEDs, incandescence, and fire, you will see that incandescence and firelight have the least amount of blue, and that the most amount of blue is happening with LEDs. Now, the sunlight also has a lot of blue in it, and this is normal, but what LEDs are missing that the sun has are in particular the red and the infrared spectrum. And this is what predominates in firelight and incandescence. So if you are looking at LEDs as a proxy for blue light emission, we are totally inundated with excessive amounts of blue light. And this has serious impacts on our circadian biology, our circadian rhythm, cortisol, and melatonin. Now, one of the most obvious and most scary impacts of blue light was seen during the 2020, 2021, 2022 lockdowns. And what Italian researchers did was basically study a massive amount of the population, and they found that there was anywhere between a 2 and a 4 year early onset of puberty, specifically in females. And digging into more of what caused that, they learned that it was the lockdowns forcing the kids to stay inside and spend more time on screens. And the excessive blue light emissions from the screens is what caused early puberty. Now, this is bizarre and weird, but if you look at the larger context of health span and lifespan, this is really serious. What was known before this was that the timing of puberty is a predictor of lifespan and health span. And in this particular study, they showed that pubertal timing predicted higher epigenetic mortality risk, and early phenotypic pubertal timing predicted accelerated Dundon pace, which is essentially a metric for aging. Both perceived and phenotypic early pubertal timing were correlated with accelerated grim age. So in other words, that the earlier a human went into puberty, the shorter their lifespan and the worse their health span. This was a major finding, and what's important to note here is that this increased or accelerated aging is not only happening with our young humans, it's happening across the entire species. And it's just most obvious at this point because humans are going through a major transformation, physical transformation at this time. But it's speeding up aging for everyone. And this is why mitigating blue light input and making sure that it's coming from the right source at the right time is one of the most foundational ways that you can take care of your health. This is taken from Dr. Andrew Huberman's website, and I agree with him on this sentiment, is that he considers viewing morning sunlight in the top 5 all actions that support mental health, physical health, and performance. And so why morning sunlight? Because naturally or ancestrally, that is when you would get peak blue, and that is how you would sync this SCN in the hypothalamus and cortisol, melatonin all together with the movement of the sun. That's sort of the easy part. And now we have to look at, well, what about after dark? Because now you have to be paying attention from the time basically of sunset until you go to sleep, how much blue light you're getting into your eye and on your skin, by the way. And so there are a few ways that you can mitigate this. One way that you can do this is to tune your device to remove blues after sundown. Now, I use f.lux on my laptop, but there are other tools that you can use. I'll just say as a caveat, I don't like night shift. It doesn't remove enough blue. So if you are on iOS and you want to remove the blue, then the best thing to do would be to go into the settings, accessibility area, and actually lower the blue color. You can select any of the colors and specifically lower the blue at sundown time. And another thing that you can do is to replace all of the LED bulbs in your home with incandescent bulbs. Unfortunately, Congress has just overturned the ban that was on incandescent bulbs recently, and so you can actually buy them again. So if you want to use something ornamental, you can use something like this, the Edison bulbs. It's important that you check the filaments to make sure that it's an actual incandescent filament and not a blue LED tube. So there are ornamental Edison bulbs that are LED, so you got to watch out for that. Or you could use a white frosted, 100-watt incandescent bulb, which would essentially give you what firelight gives you. You saw the spectral profile before. And so these are good uses in your home. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but the other problem with LEDs outside of the blue light is the flicker. And there's a lot more dramatic flicker occurring in LED, which has a sort of stressful impact on the nervous system, where incandescents have this, but it's not because of the bulb itself. It's because of the 60 hertz cycling that's in the electrical power system. So it's just less dramatic. So there's less of an impact. It's still there, but it's just less of an impact. Another thing that you can do is to use blue blocking glasses. If I am going out of my home after sundown, I have to drive the car and block the blue lights from headlights, or I'm going to an event where I know, which is basically every place, where I know that blue lights are going to be everywhere in the LEDs that they're using, I will wear blue blocking glasses to help mitigate that blue input. It does help me go to sleep faster when I come home from an event like that. And the reason is because it's offsetting that cortisol release, which is very stimulatory. Now, one more influence on our circadian biology that comes from nature that's important to note before we get out of here is the influence of the Earth's electromagnetic field on not just human rhythm and human health, but on all life. There are a couple of forces at play here. One is the Earth's geomagnetic field. Another one is the Earth's Schumann resonance, which is occurring between the crust of the Earth and the ionosphere. And so you sort of live within that Schumann resonance. You're always being affected by that. You're always being affected by the magnetic field, but there is an electrical field too that is running concurrently with that magnetic field. And the way to tap into that is by grounding. And that is your bare feet on soil or grass or sand or water that's not insulated. And so all of these types of surfaces will electrically ground your body to the earth. So the Earthing Institute has done a lot of research on the benefits in the direction of inflammation, decreasing inflammation as a result of doing this. But this study showed that grounding yourself while you're sleeping resets your diurnal cortisol levels, which is pretty impressive. So we're seeing an effect on the hypothalamus, the adrenals, and cortisol cycling as a result of electrically grounding to the earth. And this is independent of the blue light. So if you really want to get your body synchronized to natural rhythms, which is what I think everybody should be trying to do in the best of their ability, then you need to be focusing on both of these inputs. So just to recap here, I mentioned that at the core of our biology is our sensing mechanism for blue light. And that we've had a massive increase in blue light since 2000 when screens and LED bulbs started to overtake the environment. That controlling this input, especially after dark, is critical to getting good sleep and to keeping cortisol and melatonin in a good rhythm. You'll know that you're doing a good job if you get drowsy about 2 hours after you start blocking the blue at night. We talked about ways to mitigate that. We talked about grounding. And one other thing I want to mention is that some of the worst jobs to actually perform with regard to health span and lifespan are shift work, graveyard work, and time zone travel work. The WHO has actually listed these kinds of jobs in the top 10 of highest mortality. And it is theorized that the reason is because of the circadian mismatch of the nature of this work is just to be constantly mismatched to your natural light environment of the sun. Thanks for tuning in, and next episode, we'll be talking about healthy fats.